Hello, dear reader. My name is Mr. Anthony, and it's a pleasure to share with you a bit of my life journey. At 78 years old, I've seen a lot in this world and have learned quite a bit about relationships, inner peace, and the importance of taking care of ourselves. I'm going to share some stories and give some advice on these important topics. I hope my words can be useful in some way. Shall we begin? Distancing oneself as a way to protect inner peace. My dear, let me tell you a story that happened to me many years ago. I had a friend, let's call him Jack, whom I knew from my army days. We were very close, but as the years went by, I noticed that every time we met, I left feeling down and exhausted. Jack had a habit of complaining about everything and everyone. Nothing was ever good enough for him. If it rained, it was bad. If the sun was shining, it was too hot. If someone complimented him, he thought it was insincere. It was a huge burden to be around him. One day, after a particularly stressful game of dominoes with Jack, I went home and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a worn-out man with slumped shoulders. That's when I realized I needed to distance myself from him to protect my inner peace. It wasn't easy, you know. At first, I felt guilty. After all, we had been friends for so long. But gradually, I began to notice how much lighter my life became. I smiled more, slept better, even my blood pressure was more under control. Understand this, my son. Sometimes we need to distance ourselves from certain people or situations, not because we're weak, but because we're strong enough to recognize what doesn't do us good. It's like removing a pebble from your shoe. It seems small, but it makes all the difference in our walk. Remember, you don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. If a relationship is making you feel bad, making you sad or anxious, it's time to rethink. Your inner peace is a precious treasure, and you have every right to protect it. Don't be afraid to be alone for a while. It's better to be at peace with yourself than surrounded by people who drain your energy. With time, you'll attract people who truly match you, who make you feel good. And you know what? After I distanced myself from Jack, I discovered new friends in the neighborhood bocce ball group. People who laugh with me, who support me, who make my days happier. See how things work out when we take care of our peace. So, my dear, think about this. Look at your relationships and ask yourself, does this person make me feel good? Do I feel at peace when I'm with them? If the answer is no, maybe it's time to take a step back and take care of yourself. Remember, you deserve peace. You deserve tranquility. Don't be afraid to seek it, even if it means distancing yourself from someone. In the end, you'll see that you did the right thing. Cutting ties to take care of mental health. You know, my son, when we talk about health, many people only think about the body, but the health of our mind, our heart, is just as important. And sometimes, to take care of this health, we need to make difficult decisions. I remember a time quite a few years ago when I was always nervous, anxious. I wasn't sleeping well, had constant headaches. At first I thought it was just age catching up with me, but then I realized there was something more. At that time, I was part of a group of friends who met every week to play cards. It had been a tradition for years. But gradually, the game became more serious, the stakes higher. Nathan, one of the players, would get furious when he lost. He would shout, curse, sometimes even threaten us. I would come home shaking after these games. My wife, Mrs. Sarah, may God rest her soul, would get worried. Anthony, she'd say, this isn't doing you any good. And you know what? She was right. That little group, which was once a source of joy, had become a source of stress and anxiety. It was affecting my mental health. It was difficult, but one day I gathered my courage. I told my friends I wouldn't be participating in the games anymore. Some understood, others were upset. Nathan even said I was being weak. But let me tell you something. There's nothing weak about taking care of yourself. In fact, it takes a lot of strength to recognize what isn't doing you good and take action. In the first few weeks, I missed the routine, the company. But soon I realized how much more relaxed I was. My blood pressure stabilized, the headaches decreased. I started sleeping better, smiling more. I decided to use that time to do other things. I started tending to a small garden in the backyard. Sarah even joked that I talked to the plants, but you know what? It worked. Taking care of those flowers brought me a peace I hadn't felt in years. So, my dear, what I want to say with all this is, don't be afraid to cut ties that are harming your mental health. Sometimes we stay in these situations out of habit, out of fear of hurting others. But in the end, if we don't take care of ourselves, who will? Your peace of mind, your tranquility are precious treasures. If a relationship or situation is constantly making you anxious, sad, or stressed, maybe it's time to rethink. Remember, you don't need to carry the world on your shoulders. It's okay to say no to things that harm you. It's okay to distance yourself from people who drain your energy. In the end, you'll see that taking this action opens up space for good things to enter your life. Just as I discovered the joy of tending to my garden, you too can find new passions, new friendships that truly do you good. Take care of yourself, my son. Your mental health is too important to be neglected. Relationships that teach the importance of letting go. Ah, my dear, life is a great teacher, isn't it? It's a great. And some of the most important lessons it teaches us come through the people who pass through our lives. Not all of them are meant to stay forever, and that's something I took a while to understand. I remember well a co-worker, Sam. We worked together at the factory for over 20 years. At first, we were like brothers. We had lunch together, shared stories, even went fishing on weekends. But over time, things started to change. Sam became more bitter, more competitive. He started spreading gossip, trying to undermine me at work. I was confused, hurt. After all, we had been friends for so long. For years, I clung to this friendship. I tried to justify his behavior, thought it was just a rough patch. He'll go back to how he was before, I thought. But you know what? He didn't. It was hard to accept, but gradually I began to realize that relationship wasn't doing me any good anymore. It wasn't helping me grow. It didn't bring me joy. On the contrary, it was pulling me down. One day, after another argument at work, I finally understood. It was time to let go. Not out of anger or resentment, but because that relationship had already served its purpose in my life. You know, my son, some people come into our lives to stay, others to teach us something and leave. Sam taught me a lot. About friendship, about trust, and in the end, about the importance of knowing when it's time to move on. Letting go wasn't easy. There were days when I missed our conversations, the fishing trips, but with time I realized I was lighter, happier. I started to focus more on my work, made new friends, rediscovered old hobbies. What I learned from all this is that not all relationships are meant to last a lifetime, and that's okay. Some people enter our lives for a reason, a season, and then it's time to move on. Don't be afraid to let go when you feel a relationship no longer adds anything to your life. It's not selfishness, it's self-care. It's recognizing that you deserve to be surrounded by people who support you, who help you grow. And remember, letting go doesn't mean forgetting. I still hold good memories of Sam. I'm grateful for what I learned from him. But I understood that our paths needed to part. Life is a journey of constant learning, my dear. And sometimes the most important lesson someone can teach us is precisely when it's time to say goodbye. So, if you're clinging to a relationship that no longer serves you, that prevents you from growing, think about this. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is knowing when it's time to let go and move forward. And don't worry, life has an amazing way of bringing new people, new experiences when we make space for them. Trust in this process, surrounding ourselves with people who elevate us. You know, my dear, over the years I've learned that the quality of the people around us has a huge impact on our lives. It's like that old saying, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. And look, there's some truth to it. I remember a time, right after I retired from the factory, I was a bit lost, not knowing what to do with so much free time. That's when I met a group of gentlemen who gathered in the park every morning to exercise. At first, I admit I was a bit skeptical. Exercise? At my age, I thought. But I decided to give it a chance, and what a wonderful surprise, my son. This group changed my life. It was made up of incredible people, full of energy and optimism. Mr. George, at 80 years old, could do push-ups better than many young folks out there. Mrs. Lucy, always with a smile on her face, organized outings and picnics for the group. Being around them made me see life differently. I started feeling more energetic, more excited. I learned that age is just a number and that we can always learn new things. But most importantly, this group elevated me. Each meeting was a shot of encouragement. They encouraged me to take care of my health, to try new things. When I was feeling down, there was always someone with a word of support. I compared this to some other friendships I had at the time. People who only complained about life, who kept reminiscing about the good old days without doing anything to improve the present. I realized that spending time with these people, left me feeling down without energy. That's when I understood a great lesson. We should carefully choose who we spend our time with. The people around us have the power to elevate us or to pull us down. I then started to be more selective. I began to invest more time in relationships that made me feel good, that inspired me to be a better person. I didn't completely cut contact with the others, but I reduced it significantly. And you know what? The difference was like night and day. I felt lighter, happier. I started to see possibilities where before I only saw problems. My health improved, my mood too. So, my dear, the advice I leave you with is this. Pay attention to the people around you. Do they inspire you? Do they support you? Do they make you want to be a better person? If so, nurture these relationships. They are precious. If, on the other hand, you notice that some people constantly bring you down, discourage you, or don't recognize your value, maybe it's time to reevaluate these relationships. Remember, your time and energy are too valuable to be spent with those who don't value you. Surround yourself with people who elevate you, who believe in you, who inspire you to grow. In the end, the people we choose to spend time with shape much of who we become. Choose wisely, my son. Choose those who bring light to your life, the courage to distance oneself from those who hurt us. My dear, there are moments in life when we need to make difficult decisions to protect our heart and our peace. One of the toughest lessons I learned was about the courage needed to distance oneself from someone who hurts us, even when we love that person. I remember my son, Ryan. Ah, how I loved him. I still do, actually. But there was a time when our relationship became very painful. Ryan was always a good boy, but in his teenage years he started hanging out with the wrong crowd. He began drinking, skipping school. His mother and I tried to talk to him, but he would get aggressive, yelling, slamming doors. Things got worse. He started taking money in secret, lying. Once he even pushed his mother during an argument. My heart broke every time I saw the suffering in Sarah's eyes. We tried everything, talks, punishments, even family therapy. Nothing seemed to work. Each day was a new disappointment, a new hurt. I felt like a failure as a father. One day, after another ugly argument, I realized we couldn't continue like this. The environment at home was toxic. Sarah was always nervous. I couldn't sleep properly. We were all getting sick. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I asked Ryan to leave the house. Ah, my son, how it hurt. It felt like a piece of my heart was being torn out. But I knew it was necessary. Not just for us, but for him too. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. In the first few days, I felt guilty. I kept asking myself if I had done the right thing. But gradually, I noticed a change. The house became calmer. Sarah started smiling more. I started sleeping better. And you know what's most surprising? After a few months, Ryan came back. Not to live, but to talk. He had realized how much he had hurt us. He was getting treatment, trying to change his life. Our relationship started to improve slowly. Today, years later, Ryan is a good man, has his own family, and our relationship, although different, is stronger and healthier than ever. What I learned from all this is that sometimes loving someone means taking a step back. It means having the courage to set boundaries, even when it hurts. If you're in a situation where someone you love constantly hurts you, know that there's no shame in stepping away. It's not selfishness, it's self-preservation. Remember, you can't help anyone if you yourself are broken. Taking care of yourself, protecting your peace and your mental health is not selfish, it's necessary. And sometimes this distancing can be the best thing not only for you, but also for the other person. It can be the push they need to change. So, my dear, have courage. Love yourself enough not to accept mistreatment, even from those you love. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to take a step back. And remember, this doesn't mean you're abandoning the person. It means you're taking care of yourself so that you can, maybe one day, have a healthier relationship. Cutting ties as a sign of self-respect. You know, my son, for a long time in my life, I believed that being a good person meant always being available to everyone, accepting any treatment without complaining. Oh, how wrong I was. I remember a co-worker, Oscar. We worked together for years at the factory. He had a habit of making jokes about me, sometimes even in front of others. At first, I laughed along, thinking it was just playful banter. But over time, the jokes became heavier, more offensive. He mocked the way I spoke, my appearance, even my ideas in meetings. I was hurt, but I swallowed it. It's just his way, I thought. One day, after a particularly difficult meeting where Oscar humiliated me in front of everyone, I went home feeling smaller than an ant. My Sarah, always observant, noticed my low spirits and asked what had happened. When I told her, I expected her to say something like, "Let it go," or "Don't pay attention to it." But you know what she did? She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Anthony, you deserve respect. Don't let anyone treat you like that." Those words hit me like lightning. It was true. I deserved respect. Why was I allowing someone to treat me that way? The next day, I did something I had never done before. I called Oscar for a private conversation and told him as calmly as I could that I would no longer accept that kind of treatment, that his jokes hurt me and that if it continued, I would have to take the matter to our superiors. Oscar was surprised. I don't think he ever imagined I would stand up for myself. He tried to say it was just joking around, but I held my ground. From that day on, our relationship changed. He stopped with the offensive jokes, and over time, we even started getting along better. But the most important thing was how I felt. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I realized that by respecting myself, by setting clear boundaries, I was valuing myself. And you know what? The people around me started treating me differently too. It was as if, by showing that I respected myself, I had taught others to respect me as well. So, my dear, what I want to tell you is, never ever allow someone to treat you badly just to maintain a relationship. Your worth doesn't depend on others' opinions. You deserve respect always. If someone constantly disrespects you, belittles you, or ignores your feelings, it's time to set clear boundaries. And if even then the person doesn't change, don't be afraid to cut ties. This isn't being rude or selfish. It's an act of self-love, of self-preservation. Remember, healthy relationships are based on mutual respect. If there's no respect, there's no foundation for a true relationship. Value yourself, my son. Don't accept crumbs of affection or consideration. You deserve much more than that. And by respecting yourself, you teach others to respect you too. Liberation in letting go. Oh my boy, letting go. That's one of the hardest lessons life teaches us, but also one of the most liberating, believe me. I remember well when my Sarah passed away. We had been married for 52 years, can you imagine? When she left, I felt as if a part of me had gone with her. The first few months were terrible. I didn't want to get out of bed, didn't want to see anyone. I felt that if I let the pain go away, I would be betraying her memory. But you know what? One day my little granddaughter Annie came to visit me. She climbed onto my lap, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Grandpa, Grandma wouldn't like to see you so sad." Those simple words from a child hit me like lightning. Annie was right. My Sarah had always been a cheerful woman, full of life. She wouldn't want to see me withering away like that. It was then that I began to understand what it really means to let go. It's not about forgetting, about erasing memories. It's about accepting that life goes on, that we can honor those we love by being happy. I started forcing myself to leave the house. I went back to the exercise group in the park. I started attending a reading group at the library. Little by little, I allowed myself to smile again, allowed myself to live. And you know what I realized? The more I allowed myself to live, the more I felt Sarah's presence with me. Not in a sad, heavy way, but in a light way, as if she were smiling at me, approving of my journey. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting that things change, that people come and go, and that this is part of life. It means making room in your heart for new experiences, new joys. This applies not only when we lose someone, but also to relationships that end, to dreams that don't come true the way we expected. Clinging to the past, to what could have been, only brings us suffering. When we learn to let go, we free ourselves. We free not only ourselves, but also the people around us. We create space for new possibilities, new beginnings. So, my dear, if you're holding on to something or someone that's no longer part of your life, think about this. Honor what was, keep the good memories, but allow yourself to move forward. Letting go is not an act of weakness. It's an act of courage, of self-love. It's recognizing that you deserve peace, that you deserve to be happy, even if circumstances have changed. And remember, by letting go, you're not losing anything. You're gaining the freedom to fully live the present and to be open to what the future holds. Life is like a river, my son. It's always moving. If we try to hold on to it, we'll only end up drowning. But if we learn to flow with it, then we discover true freedom, recognizing when it's time to leave. You know, my boy, one of the hardest things in life is knowing when it's time to say goodbye, whether it's to a job, a place, or a person. Often we stay stuck in situations that no longer do us good, just out of fear of change or not wanting to disappoint others. I remember well when I worked at the factory. I'd been there for over 30 years, knew every corner, every machine. It was like a second home to me. But in the last few years, things started to change. New technologies arrived, the pace became faster, and I just couldn't keep up like before. I started feeling anxious every time I went to work. I was afraid of making mistakes, of not being able to handle the job. My health started to deteriorate. High blood pressure, insomnia, back pain. But even so, I resisted the idea of retiring. What am I going to do at home all day? I thought. What if they need me here? I was afraid of feeling useless, of losing my identity. It was my old friend Joe who opened my eyes. One day after work, he said to me, "Tony, you've given so much of yourself to this factory. Don't you think it's time to live a little for yourself?" Those words hit me deep. I realized I was clinging to something that no longer did me good, just out of fear of the unknown. I was sacrificing my health, my peace of mind for something that no longer brought me satisfaction. It wasn't easy to make the decision to retire. It took me a few months. I thought about it a lot, but when I finally took the step, I felt an enormous relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. And you know what? Life after retirement turned out to be much richer and more interesting than I had imagined. I started doing things I always wanted to do but never had time for. I learned to play the guitar, started tending a garden, spent more time with my grandchildren. What I learned from all this is that recognizing when it's time to leave is not a sign of weakness. It's an act of courage and self-love. It's understanding that sometimes to grow we need to leave behind what no longer serves us. This applies to jobs, to places where we live, and yes, even to relationships. Sometimes we stay in situations that no longer make us happy, just out of fear of change or not wanting to hurt someone. But you know, my son, life is too short to live unhappily. If you're in a situation that constantly makes you feel bad, that drains your energy, that prevents you from growing, maybe it's time to consider leaving. Of course, I'm not saying to run away at the first sign of difficulty. Some situations deserve us to fight, to try to improve things. But if you've tried everything and nothing changes, if you constantly feel unhappy or anxious, it's time to seriously reflect. Remember, you deserve to be happy. You deserve to be in places and with people who value you, who make you grow. Don't be afraid to seek that, even if it means leaving behind something familiar. Life has an incredible way of opening new doors when we close old ones. Trust in that process. Trust in yourself, the wisdom of taking care of oneself. My dear, we've come to the end of our conversation, and I want to leave you with some final reflections. Throughout life, I've learned that taking care of yourself is not selfishness, it's a necessity. It's like tending to a garden. Sometimes we need to prune some plants so that others can flourish. Always remember, your inner peace is precious. Protect it even if it means distancing yourself from people or situations that disturb it. Your mental health is as important as your physical health. Don't hesitate to cut ties that harm it. Some relationships have an expiration date, and that's okay. What's important is what we learn from them. Surround yourself with people who elevate you, who inspire you to be better. They are a treasure. Having the courage to distance yourself from those who hurt us is an act of self-love. Respect yourself. Don't accept less than you deserve in any relationship. Letting go is not losing. It's freeing yourself for new possibilities. Knowing when to leave a situation that no longer serves you is wisdom. I remember an afternoon sitting on the porch of my house, looking at the garden I planted after retiring. Each flower, each plant there, represented a lesson I had learned, a difficulty I had overcome. I realized that my life, like that garden, flourished when I learned to care for it with love, to prune what was no longer healthy, to nurture what made me feel good. And you know what? It's never too late to start this care. I was already in my 60s when I really understood the importance of taking care of myself, of protecting my peace. So, my son, take these lessons with you. Take care of yourself, love yourself, respect yourself, Life is too precious a journey to be lived for others, or carrying burdens that are not yours. Remember, you are the gardener of your life. Plant love, cultivate peace, prune what no longer serves you, and you'll see that with time your garden will become more beautiful and vibrant than you ever imagined. And so, my dear, I end our conversation. I hope these words from an old man can illuminate your path a little. Life is a great teacher and we're always learning. Take good care of yourself, and may your journey be filled with flowers and sweet fruits.